So today we're talking about a place called Prospect House Mansion or Prospect Mansion or Kinway. It's got so many different names.
Trinway Mansion.
Kinway, that's it. Kinway Mansion. So we're talking about this. Ian actually mentioned it on the last show that we wanted to touch on this. So this is the house behind me. It's just really cool.
It's so spooky looking.
And I made sure I found like a really neat old black and white photo of it because
is that a widow's peak at the top there?
Yes, it's got that widow's walk.
Yeah.
Widow's
I love
peak.
those.
You know what this house reminds me of, Ian? It reminds me of the
Castle Kilbride.
Kilbride, yep.
Oh, yes.
Kilbride in Waterloo area of
Baden.
Ontario.
Yeah, Baden, Ontario.
It looks a lot like Castle Kilbride. It's really similar.
It does, yeah.
And like Castle Kilbride, everything kind of goes behind it because Castle Kilbride is so
it's narrow.
Well, it's narrow, but the weird thing about it is it's got an entire city hall attached to the back of it.
That's right. Yeah.
From the street view, you don't see that until you walk on or pull onto the side of the property, and then you can see that they have City Hall attached to the back of the building, which to me is kind of a shame, but hey, what do I know? I guess it's going to tearing down the house, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the house is kind of a standalone entity, that it's a museum, and then the City Hall is behind it. Now, this one is a museum, as far as I can see from all of the information that I've been looking at, the website. I did quite a bit of digging around to get some information on it. They do have a website, and it's gwacenter.org. So if anybody's interested in visiting this grand palatial home, it's in Ohio near a town called Dresden, Ohio. So sort of the Ohio east part of the state. So Ian, do you want to kick this off? Because you sort of picked this house to talk about, and actually looking at the version of the photograph that I'm looking at now, I can't tell where I'm looking because I'm looking at the house and it looks like you have this house and then there's a structure off the side, but I feel like this is the side of the house. And
well, the house itself, the main house is very squared.
Right. Yes.
So yes, it's going to be difficult to determine in that photograph exactly which side of the house we're looking at.
Right.
And then yes, there's a smaller structure that comes off the back, and then beside that there is an old brick barn,
like a stable. Yeah,
that's an old stables and barn structure that's there.
Right. Yes, and I noticed that, and it was really it's really beautiful. I mean, it's a gorgeous home, and it must have been
built in 1856.
Right. Yeah.
Just beautiful.
So what do you want to tell us about?
Built by a man named George Adams, who was a very successful businessman.
Now, here's something I wondered. Was he related to John Adams, who became...
that I don't know. I don't
That's a
know.
good question.
Yeah,
whether he was related to the president or not.
Because they were from Virginia, right? So...
Yeah.
But George Adams was a very successful man. He owned a railroad. He owned milling operations. He owned boats for shipping cargo down the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. He owned a company that manufactured bridges.
So
apparently there's a very famous bridge somewhere in Ohio that his company built.
So he was a transportation guy. He made his money in, moving people around the country, I guess, and in a sense, getting cargo shipped and moved and bridge building, all of those kinds of things. So one of those one of those, what did they used to call them? Movers and shakers of the day, right? All these guys that were involved with the railroad
Oh, yes.
expansions, all of this, they made big money fast
Mm-hmm.
at that
Yeah.
time.
Part of the industrialization of
Yeah.
that particular area, and I imagine a pivotal part of Ohio.
Now, before you continue, Ian, I just want to say something. When I was doing my research and reading, what I found most amusing was when they were talking about the railroad was the idea of the expansion to the west. Now, for me, this is kind of in the eastern side of the state of Ohio, right? And to think that Ohio was kind of the expanse to the west at that time is kind of funny, because we still sort of see Ohio as, part of sort of the eastern side of the United States. But at that time,
Yeah.
that was considered moving to the west, right? Like people were going west and beyond Pennsylvania and heading sort of that way. So interesting.
But for George Adams' success, Prospect Place was actually quite something, because he had indoor plumbing and hot running water.
Wow.
Which was probably unheard of at the time.
In 1856 was completely unheard of.
So yeah, so he's a bit
actually
like
that kind of
So he was
reminds
an
me-
innovator. He was, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would
And
liken him
Sika,
back
that
to-
kind of reminds me of Dundurn
McNabb.
Castle here in Hamilton,
right, and
because
McNabb,
Dundurn
yes,
Castle
McNabb.
also had running water and hot running water and indoor plumbing.
and a huge sub basement freezing big blocks of ice in there in where they
That's
could,
right. They had this big pit
yeah,
dug
Wow.
down into
Cold
the basement
storage.
that they would fill with ice that they
and
could keep there
sawdust.
year round
Mhm.
for
Yeah, ice,
food
sawdust, and
preservation
salt.
and everything. Yeah.
So these guys, they were, because they're around the same time period too, right? With the construction
Yes.
of these homes.
Yes.
So we're seeing some innovation here. Clearly, it would be much better. Now, I wonder if does it say, did they have indoor bathroom? Because McNabb had an indoor bathroom, which was he had an actual toilet in the house, like
That's
his own
incredible.
water
That,
closet.
for its time frame, that is
Yeah.
incredible. I mean,
I wonder. I'm going to suspect
I
if they've
don't
got
know that. I
running
don't
water.
I
know.
wonder if people know how to use them.
Well, yeah. I mean, we laugh about that, but I'm sure they did, because it's hence why it was known as a water closet, because it wasn't
Yeah.
like what we consider today as our bathrooms, but at that time to have indoor. I mean, if you think about it, even in the early medieval period, there was indoor
Oh
toilets.
yeah, at
They
Warwick
had-
Castle they had a certain place where it was basically a hole, where they
that could
sat.
run off into the moat. But I
Yeah,
mean, in
that's
terms
true,
of
yes.
this house, though, this is something that we can look at and say, this is something we could live in, right? This is,
Mhm.
it's not a castle, it's a big house, but to have.
Are you
all
hinting,
those-
Seeker?
those
Should we
features-
pull all our money together and invest
It had
What do you think
29
here?
rooms.
29?
29?
29
Wow.
rooms.
Wow, that's a good
In that
size.
house.
Do they have
Yeah.
a separate building for staff? Or is that like
That actually could be what that little structure coming off the back
I
Oh,
wonder-
might have been used for. I can't
Maybe.
confirm that, but
I think
you look
I
at the
think it's
photographs and you've got this main big squared house,
Mhm.
and then there's a smaller, flatter
Oh,
piece
yes.
coming off the very
There's
back.
2 stories off the back, but I
And
would
that-
suspect
That
there's-
could have been a servant's quarters for sure.
there's
Yeah.
outbuildings as well beyond that. So it's, they may have had some of the older homes have that. I know, Ian, like if you look at
Thank you.
Kilbride, they had that space up top too, that they used as well. So I'm curious, but going there, and I'm hoping to go there in August.
My husband just chimed in. He thinks it was a carriage house, the smaller house. If you look in the picture of the Prospect Place, I'm going from the Wikipedia, the one. He thinks the smaller house might have been a carriage house.
there's a lot of buildings on the property I was looking at. So that's
Oh,
something that when
okay.
I get there, I'll make sure I ask them.
Oh,
So
yeah,
we can
yeah,
answer
that
the
would be
question,
great.
right?
Now, the
So,
one that
okay,
I'm
so
talking
tell us
about, where
more.
where it's a smaller structure, that's actually attached to the house itself.
Yes,
The
Oh,
carriage
I
house
see. Oh,
would have been the
okay.
barn, which is a
yes, there's,
separate
I'll
building
send the,
off to the side.
mhm.
I'm looking at the separate building off to the side.
Yes, so,
Mm.
so Ian, tell us more about Mr., is his name Wells, Mr. Wells? Or
George
Adams,
Adams.
George
George
Adams,
Adams.
George Adams. There
Now,
we go.
the whole famous aspect of Prospect Place with George Adams is that he was also an abolitionist.
Okay,
And there was opportunity for him when he was taking his boats down to Louisiana to ship the flour that they had manufactured down there. When they were empty on their return trip home, they would gather runaway slaves, hide them in the lower decks of the boat, and bring them back to Ohio, where they could then go to the different Underground Railroad stations and off to Canada or wherever it was that they were heading off to.
Upstate New York.
Now, the man,
Yeah.
what's that, Rachel? Sorry.
Oh,
Upstate
upstate New York.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
underground railroads up here in upstate New York.
Yes,
Now, Prospect Place, the mansion itself, was actually a station house on the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
And it's said that George Adams built the mansion in the style that he did, designed it with that in mind of making it a Underground Railroad station. So you've got the Widow's Walk watchtower up on top, and from up there you could see 360 degrees around the property. And in addition to Mr. Adams bringing in the enslaved people on his boat, the property was open to those who were on land coming across. And what they would do is they'd go up into this tower, and when it was safe for the enslaved people, runaways, to run towards the house, they would light a lantern up in this tower, and they would know that, okay, here's the signal, it's safe. And they were funneled down into through these large basement doors. If you get the right photographs, you can see the doors in there. And these enslaved people would go down into the basement, into several rooms that were built down in the basement for that. And when they arrived, Mr. Adams gave them food and clothing and medicine and anything else that they would have needed at that time to help them out at the moment, as well as help them out through their continuing journey.